Ready to give your English skills a boost? Well, you are in the right place. Today, we are doing a deep dive into some super cool teacher training posters from India.
From India.
Yeah. They are from a project called BLISS.
Bless.
That's BLISS, the Bihar Language Initiative for Secondary Schools project.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is, haha. But basically, these posters are packed with insider tips from teachers who are, out there making English learning happen every day.
Straight from the source. I like it. So what kind of tips are we talking about here?
Well, one of the things that caught my eye was this poster by Anupam Kumari. It's all about speaking English confidently.
Speaking. That's the goal for so many English learners, to be able to just, have a conversation and express themselves freely.
Exactly. And one of the tips on this poster really resonated with me. It says, and I'm quoting here, think of ways to help other people understand you.
Think of ways to help other people understand you. I like that. It's like taking the pressure off yourself and putting the focus on the communication itself.
Right. Like, it's not just about grammar and pronunciation. It's about connecting with another person.
It is. It's about getting your message across in a way that makes sense to the other person.
Exactly. And that can be really empowering,
Yeah.
because it means that even if you make a few mistakes, if people can still understand you, then you're succeeding.
Totally. Communication is a two-way street, right?
It is. It is. Now, on a more practical level, this poster also emphasizes using simple vocabulary when you're speaking.
Makes sense. Sometimes we try to use big words and complex sentences when really simpler is better.
So true. It's about clarity, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the pronunciation piece. The poster encourages us to, keep practicing our pronunciation.
Yeah, pronunciation can be tricky, especially for sounds that don't exist in your native language.
It can be. And this is where those little everyday practices come in, like listening to podcasts or, even just talking to yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
Now-
Whatever works. And I think it's important to remember that even native speakers have different accents and pronunciations.
Oh, absolutely. English is spoken all over the world, and there's so much diversity in how it sounds.
That's one of the beautiful things about language, isn't it? The variety.
It is. It is. Okay, so we've talked about pronunciation, but one thing that can really hold people back from speaking confidently is fear.
Yes, the fear of making mistakes. I think we've all been there.
Totally. And this poster actually addresses that head on. Anupam Kumari writes, do not be afraid. Like, straight up, do not be afraid to speak English.
I love that. It's such a simple but powerful message, because fear can be paralyzing. Right?
Absolutely. So this poster kind of gives you permission to let go of that fear and just start speaking.
And I think that's so important, because the more you practice, the less scary it becomes.
Right. It's like, the more you do something, the more comfortable you get with it. And that's where another poster by Deepak Kumar Chaudhary comes in with a super practical tip.
Oh, what's that?
He says, use a mirror.
A mirror.
Yeah, like stand in front of a mirror and practice speaking English to yourself.
Interesting. I can see that would be helpful. It's like giving a presentation to your most supportive audience.
Exactly, yourself. And you can really focus on your pronunciation, your facial expressions, all of that.
I like it. It's a simple tool that everyone has access to. You don't need any fancy equipment or anything.
And you can do it anytime, anywhere. Now, speaking of specific sounds that can be challenging for English learners.
Oh, yeah, those tricky sounds.
Yeah, those tricky sounds. Well, there's another poster here by Dhananjay Pandey that dives into some consonant sounds that often trip people up.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, well, he specifically mentions E, H, V, F, L, R, W, and H.
Yes. I can see why those would be tricky.
Yeah, they can be tough because, they either don't exist in some languages or they're produced in a slightly different way.
Right. So, for example, that E sound, like in think or this, that involves placing your tongue between your teeth.
Yes, and that can feel really awkward if you're not used to it.
For sure. That's like learning a whole new way to use your mouth.
It is. It is. So I'm curious, do you have any tips for mastering these kinds of sounds? Like, what would you suggest to our listeners who are struggling with these particular sounds?
Well, I think one thing that can really help is to pay close attention to the physical movements involved. Like, where's your tongue? What are your lips doing?
So it's about being really aware of what your mouth is doing.
Exactly. And sometimes it can even help to exaggerate those movements at first, just to get a feel for the sound.
So like really over-enunciate.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be afraid to look a little silly. You're not performing for anyone. You're just practicing.
And I bet there are tons of videos online that demonstrate the correct pronunciation of these sounds.
Oh, absolutely. YouTube is a fantastic resource for language learners.
For sure. Okay, so we've covered speaking and pronunciation. Now let's move on to vocabulary.
Ah, vocabulary, the building blocks of language.
They are, but I think we've all had that experience of, staring at a page full of new words and just feeling completely overwhelmed.
Oh, yeah, I can feel like you're trying to climb a mountain of words.
Totally. But one of the posters here by Ardhendu Bhushan Sinha reminds us that vocabulary building doesn't have to be this daunting task.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's his secret?
Well, he suggests using some creative techniques like flashcards.
Ah, good old flashcards, tried and true.
Exactly. And mind maps.
Mind maps, now those are interesting.
They are. And then he also talks about learning words in networks.
In networks?
Yeah, like instead of just memorizing isolated words, thinking about how they relate to each other.
Okay, I see where he's going with this. It's about making connections. It's like building a web of meaning.
Exactly. And he even gives an example. He talks about grouping words into categories like transportation, water, air, and land.
I like that. That's
Yeah.
a really clear and visual way to organize vocabulary. And I think it speaks to a really important principle of language learning, which is making it meaningful, like connecting new words to things you already know.
Right. So it's not just rote memorization. It's about, like you said, creating those connections in your mind.
And the science backs this up. Like our brains are wired to remember information better when it's connected to something we already know.
Interesting. So how can we, practically apply this? Besides the flashcards and the mind maps, are there other ways to kind of weave new vocabulary into our existing knowledge?
Sure. One really effective way is to create a story around the word, or even a little scene in your head. Like if you're learning the word ship, you can imagine yourself standing on the deck of a ship, feeling the wind in your hair and the sun on your face.
Ooh, I like that. You're engaging all your senses. You're creating a whole experience around the word.
Exactly. And that makes it much more memorable than just, reading a definition in a dictionary.
So true. Okay, now we can't talk about English skills without talking about reading.
Ah, yes. Reading. The gateway to so much knowledge and enjoyment.
It is. And one of the posters here by Mukund Murari Ram has this really cool image of a boy with perfect reading skills.
A boy with perfect reading skills. I'm intrigued.
So each part of his body represents a different reading strategy, like his head, his eyes, his mouth.
Okay, this sounds fascinating. Break it down for me.
Okay, so his head represents generating positive thinking towards reading, like getting yourself in the right mindset before you even start reading.
Ah, I see. It's like setting the stage for a good reading experience.
Exactly. And then his eyes are for making judgments and predictions about what you're going to read.
Oh, interesting. So like looking at the title, the headings, the pictures, and kind of getting a sense of what the text is going to be about.
Exactly. You're sort of setting the set in your mind.
And that can really help with comprehension, right? Because you're already starting to activate your prior knowledge and make connections.
Absolutely. And then the mouth is for asking questions.
Asking questions.
Yeah.
About the text.
Yeah. So as you're reading, you're actively engaging with the text and asking yourself questions like, what's the main idea here? Or what's going to happen next?
Ah, I love that. It's like you're having a conversation with the author. You're not just passively absorbing the words, but you're actively thinking about them.
Precisely. And this poster also highlights some really important strategies like identifying keywords, figuring out their meaning from the context.
Context is key.
It is. It is. And connecting what you're reading to what you already know, and even, evaluating the author's arguments.
So it's about going beyond just understanding the words on the page.
Exactly. It's about digging into the meaning, the message, the intention behind the words.
It's about becoming an active reader rather than a passive reader.
Exactly. And that's how you really get the most out of what you're reading.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked about speaking, listening, vocabulary, and reading, but what about the connections between all of these skills?
Ah, yeah, the interplay. Because you can't really have one without the other, right?
They're all interconnected, like threads in a tapestry.
They are. And we have two posters here, one by Sheetal Deva and another by Tanushree Chowdhury, that really emphasize the link between speaking and listening.
Ah, yes. The dynamic duo of communication.
Exactly. And they actually have some really specific tips, like recording yourself speaking to, identify areas for improvement.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
That could be really eye-opening. Sometimes we don't realize how we sound until we hear ourselves.
And sometimes it's painful.
Uh-huh. It can be.
Yeah.
But it's valuable feedback.
Totally. They also suggest joining debates or discussions to practice speaking skills in a real-world setting.
Ooh, that's a good one. Because it forces you to think on your feet and respond to what other people are saying.
And to do it in real time.
Exactly. No time to overthink it.
And then there's this really intriguing tip, and it's about listening to what isn't said.
Ooh, listening to what isn't said. Now that's a powerful concept.
It is. And I think it really highlights the importance of nonverbal communication.
Absolutely. Body language, tone of voice, pauses, silences, all of that can communicate just as much as words.
Right. So it's not just about the words themselves. It's about the whole package, the whole context.
No reading between the lines.
Yeah.
Picking up on those subtle cues.
Exactly. And that's a skill that can benefit you, not just in English, but in all areas of life.
For sure. It's about becoming a more attuned communicator.
And that's a skill that will serve you well no matter what language you're speaking.
Absolutely. So before we move on, I'm curious, is there anything that has particularly stood out to you from these posters so far?
I think what's really striking me is how much emphasis these teachers put on mindset.
Mindset.
Yeah, like having a positive attitude towards learning English. It's not just about, memorizing rules and vocabulary.
Right. It's about embracing the journey that challenges the mistakes. It's about believing in yourself and your ability to learn.
And finding joy in the process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because, learning a language can be tough, but it can also be incredibly rewarding.
It can be. And I think these posters really capture that sense of, possibility and excitement that comes with learning English.
I agree. It's inspiring. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of these amazing posters. There's so much more to explore. Welcome back to our Bliss Poster Deep Dive.
These posters are awesome, and we've only just begun to tap into the amazing tips they have. What else is there?
Well, remember Dhananjay Pandey's poster, the one with all the tricky consonant sounds? He had another tip in there that I think is worth revisiting.
Oh, right. The THVF, all those sounds.
Exactly. Well, he also suggested using tongue twisters as a way to practice those sounds.
Tongue twisters. I remember trying those as a kid. I always got so tongue-tied. But I never really thought of them as like an actual learning tool.
Well, they can be super effective.
Okay.
Think about it. When you're saying a tongue twister, you're really focusing on those specific sounds and how to produce them correctly.
Yeah, you have to. Otherwise, it all falls apart.
Right. You're training your mouth muscles to move quickly and accurately.
So it's like a workout for your tongue.
Exactly. And just like any workout, the more you practice, the stronger and more coordinated you become. Yeah, they're fun.
That's true. Way more fun than just repeating the same sound over and over. Do you have any favorites?
Oh, there's so many good ones. A classic for practicing chalets and C sounds is "She sells seashells by the seashore."
She sells seashells by the seashore. Oh my gosh, see, I'm already getting tripped up.
It's harder than it looks, isn't it? Another one I like is Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Great for those P sounds.
Okay, I'm going to need to write these down so I can practice later. This is great. It's a much more fun way to practice pronunciation.
For sure. And you can even get creative and make up your own tongue twisters. Use words that you find particularly challenging.
That's a good idea. Okay, so we've talked a lot about speaking, pronunciation. Let's move on to grammar.
Grammar, the foundation of any language.
It is, but it can be so intimidating for a lot of people. I know it was for me when I was learning English.
It's understandable. English grammar can be complex, but it's also really important if you want to be able to express yourself clearly and accurately.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes I feel like those grammar books are so dense and technical, it can be really overwhelming.
I get it. But the good news is there are a lot of grammar books out there that are written in a much more accessible way. Like some of them even use humor or fun illustrations to help you learn the concepts.
So it's about finding the right resources, something that speaks to you.
Exactly. And don't forget about all the amazing online resources available nowadays. There are websites, apps, videos, all kinds of things that can help you learn grammar in a more interactive and engaging way.
Okay, so read grammar books, explore online resources, and what else? Any other tips for improving our grammar?
Well, one of the simplest but most effective ways to improve your grammar is to just practice using it.
Practice using it. Like how?
Write in English as much as possible. Keep a journal, write a blog, send emails, even just write social media posts. Anything that gets you using the language.
So it's about, like, making English a part of your daily life.
Exactly. And when you're speaking, try to be mindful of the grammar rules you've learned. It might feel a little awkward at first, but the more you do it, the more natural it will become.
I think a lot of us get really stuck on the fear of making mistakes, especially when it comes to grammar.
I know. But it's so important to remember that everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers.
They do. I guess I never really thought about it that way.
Oh, yeah. Mistakes are a natural part of learning. It's how we figure out what we need to work on.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about, like, using those mistakes as stepping stones.
Exactly. So instead of beating yourself up when you make a mistake, try to see it as an opportunity to learn and grow.
I like that. So how can we get over that fear then? The fear of making mistakes?
Well, I think one thing that can help is to create a safe and supportive learning environment for yourself. Surround yourself with people who encourage you and make you feel comfortable practicing your English, even if you make mistakes.
That's where those English clubs mentioned in Anupam Kumari's poster could come in handy, right?
Yes, joining a club or finding a language partner can be a game changer. It's about having a community where you can practice without feeling judged.
Okay, so we're building confidence, we're practicing. Now let's talk about fluency. How can we speak English more, smoothly and confidently?
Fluent speaking? Well, Anupam Kumari's poster mentioned thinking about the pace of your speech.
Oh, right, like not speaking too fast, not speaking too slow.
Finding that sweet spot where you feel comfortable, and it's also easy for others to understand you.
How do you find that sweet spot?
Well, one way is to listen to recordings of native speakers. Pay attention to how quickly or slowly they speak. You can listen to podcasts, audiobooks, even watch movies and TV shows.
So it's about immersing yourself in the sounds of the language, right? Getting a feel for the natural flow.
Exactly. And you can also practice speaking out loud and recording yourself. That way you can hear how you sound and identify areas where you might be rushing or slowing down.
Tanushree Chowdhury's poster also talked about varying your pace, your tone, your volume.
Oh, yes. That's a great way to add expression to your speech and make it more interesting for the listener. Think about it. When someone's speaking in a monotone, it can be pretty boring to listen to.
It's true.
But when they vary their pitch and tone, it makes their speech much more engaging and lively. It's like adding those highs and lows to a musical melody, right?
Yes, it brings it to life.
And that brings us to another important element of fluency, which is confidence.
Confidence, the key ingredient. But how do you build confidence when you're still learning a language and feeling uncertain about yourself?
It's a journey, for sure, but it starts with believing in yourself and your ability to learn.
Sometimes we're so focused on what we haven't mastered yet that we forget about how far we've come.
Exactly. Celebrate those wins, big or small.
That's a good point. We need to give ourselves more credit.
And remember, confidence grows through practice. The more you speak English, the more comfortable and fluent you'll become.
The more you do it, the easier it gets.
Exactly. And all of these tips we've been talking about, they're all about providing opportunities to practice and build confidence. Joining English clubs, participating in debates, having conversations, even talking to yourself in the mirror.
Whatever it takes.
Find ways to make it fun and engaging, and the confidence will follow.
It's not about reaching some mythical level of perfection.
Not at all. It's about progress, not perfection.
I love that. So, as we wrap up this part of our Bliss poster deep dive, is there anything that particularly resonated with you?
You know, I'm struck by how much emphasis these posters place on the importance of practice and mindset. It's not just about knowing the rules. It's about actually using the language and believing in your ability to learn.
Couldn't agree more. And we are back for our final deep dive into these awesome Bliss posters.
I know. I can't believe how much great stuff is packed into these posters.
I know, right? It's like every time we look at one, we find something new and interesting.
I know. I feel like we could talk about them for hours and still not cover everything.
Me too. But, we do have to wrap things up eventually.
We do. But before we do, I wanted to circle back to a few things that really stood out to me.
Okay. What did you have in mind?
Well, first of all, remember those creative techniques that Ardhendu Bhushan Sinha talked about in his poster? The flashcards, the mind maps, the word networks.
Yeah, those were good, especially that example of grouping words into categories like transportation, water, air, and land.
Right. It's such a simple but effective way to organize vocabulary and make it easier to remember.
It's all about making those connections in your mind.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it speaks to a broader principle of language learning, which is about making it meaningful.
Making it meaningful? In what way?
Well, Instead of just memorizing isolated words, you're thinking about how those words relate to each other, how they fit into a larger context.
So it's not just about learning the words themselves, but also about understanding how they're used and how they connect to your own experiences.
Exactly. And when you can make those connections, it makes the learning process so much more engaging and enjoyable.
And the information sticks better.
Exactly. Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to mention was Mukund Murari Ram's poster with the boy with perfect reading skills.
Oh, yeah, that was such a cool visual, each part of his body representing a different reading strategy.
Right. And it really emphasized that reading comprehension is an active process. It's not just about passively absorbing the words on the page.
It's about thinking critically, asking questions, making connections, and really digging into the meaning behind the words.
And those are skills that can benefit you in all areas of life, not just in reading.
They are. Okay, so we've talked a lot about those internal processes, the mental strategies for learning English, but I think it's also important to remember the role of, physicality, body language in communication.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the posters actually addressed that directly. It was Sheetal Deva's poster, and it had this simple but powerful reminder: maintain gestures and eye contact.
So simple, but so important.
I know, right? It's easy to forget about body language when you're focusing so much on your words.
But it can make such a big difference in how your message is perceived.
It can. Think about it. Your body language can convey confidence, enthusiasm, sincerity, or, it can convey boredom, disinterest, even disrespect.
It's like you're speaking a whole other language with your body.
Exactly. And Tanushree Chaudhury's poster also touched on this with the reminder to support words with gestures.
Right. Like your gestures can actually help to emphasize and clarify your words.
They can. And they can also help to make your communication more engaging and dynamic.
It's like you're adding another layer of meaning.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Bliss posters, I think the main takeaway is that learning English is about so much more than just memorizing grammar rules and vocabulary.
It's about using all of yourself, your mind, your body, your creativity, your personality to really engage with the language and make it your own.
Beautifully said. It's about finding what works for you and embracing the journey.
Exactly. So for all of you listening out there, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question. Which of these tips resonated with you the most, and what's one small step you can take today to put it into practice?
We encourage you to explore the Bliss Project further. And remember, every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to your language learning goals.
Keep practicing, keep experimenting, and keep having fun with it.
Until next time, happy learning.